Peter, thank you, and thanks everyone for being here. And so we're here to talk about the future of media. Before we do that, I think most people in the audience are familiar with the North Face. You are you are an iconic brand, right? Some 64 years old, but I'd love to hear, from in your words, a little bit about what is your the purpose and mission before we start to talk about the future, because ultimately I know in our discussion how much obviously the past remains part of your present and will also remain part of your future. So if we can maybe start there.
Yeah, definitely. Great to be here, by the way, and good to see you, Douglas. The North Face, for us, getting people outside is almost our number one mission. Our tagline is never stop exploring, and we are an outdoor brand. I think heritage is super important to us, but also the mission of the North Face in that way of human exploration and getting people outside is really important to who we are and really important to how we create our media and how we market ourselves.
Yeah, and can you tell us a little bit about your audience, because it is multi-generational, unlike other brands that may have more focused audiences. You're looking to get as many folks out there. Can you tell us a little bit about how you view your consumers?
Yeah, we definitely have multiple consumers that we're communicating with. We at the heart of who we are, we have our major outdoor consumers. Those are the top of mountain type of consumers. We also have just anyone who wants to get outside. We are a huge fan of, and at the same time, we also have this this city consumer. Our consumers are a 365 person. They aren't just the person who skis maybe on the weekend or the person who goes running when they can find the time. They do a lot of other activities in their lives. And, we like to, even our own athletes, we like to think of them as more than just an athlete, right? They're more than just their sport. And so we do have this, lifestyle side as well that we've, in the past few years, I would say more than before, have been looking at and figuring out the best way that we talk to them, but always, as we've discussed, with our heritage and us as an outdoor brand in mind.
Excellent. I'm curious, maybe, we start out with something a little bit more, grounded, if you will. Given the different audiences that you have, can you tell us a little bit about, how is your media, the way that you communicate with all of these audiences changed in the recent past, and where do you see that going?
Yeah, I would say, we have a lot of conversations about what never stop exploring means. And, I've been with the brand for about a decade at this point. And, our marketing used to be, we go on an expedition, the athletes go and do some incredible feat. We take some incredible photos and make some video content and do a TV commercial.
Yeah,
that has changed dramatically in the time that I've been here. There are multiple channels and facets that you can communicate to a consumer. And I think one of the things that we've thought a lot about is, how do we create a message that can resonate across all of it, like that any consumer can look at and connect with. And I think, as we were talking, one of the ones that you mentioned is the campaign that we recently did this fall. It's more than a jacket. Yeah. If you look back at the campaign, there were multiple jackets we highlighted with multiple different uses, whether that's in sport or more to our lifestyle side of the brand. But even one of our biggest lifestyle products, the Trans-Antarctica collection, is grounded in this amazing expedition that happened in Trans-Antarctica years ago. And I actually got to interview one of the people who was on the expedition and the origination of how this jacket was created, why it was created. Yeah. And so, it's always rooted in that like outdoor mindset. And because we have all this heritage, we have these stories that we can pull from the past and have these like new ways that we're bringing them to life that I think is really incredible for us.
You know, one of the things that I admire about the North Face brand is that, and you bring this out obviously, and that campaign comes out more than ever, which is, you know, North Face really captures kind of, you know, the human journey, if you will, right? I mean, we talk about celebration, we talk about challenges, we talk about passion, you know, we talk about wanting to you know, exceed our own limits, and it's this sort of the greater, you know, it captures so much of what our journey here, like on Earth, is itself. So it's remarkable, and it does it in a way that is, like you said, captures not only, you know, you don't necessarily need to go to Antarctica. I mean, these are remarkable feats. Of course, there are, but by the same token, you know, it can be people also just doing runs, or, you know, just people getting outdoors and on hikes. And I know that, for example, your other campaign also did that quite well. It was Have You Ever, right? Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I think you know, one of the things that we talk about a lot is, you know, pushing your limits, and that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So pushing your limits as an athlete who, you know, skis as their career, you know, I push my limits skiing, but I'm definitely not skiing at the level that an athlete's pushing their limits at. But like, I still get that same feeling that an athlete can get. And so we talk a lot about how can we bring that out? And Have You Ever is a great example of that, because, you know, anyone can kind of connect with a message like, have you ever gotten up early to see the sunrise? You know, have you ever, you know, done something that is like bigger for you? And it doesn't necessarily have to be the greatest feat in the world that's ever happened, but it was something to you that was like above and beyond what you feel like you may have been capable of doing. And what we find with More Than a Jacket and also Have You Ever is the consumer connects with it, and then they end up talking about it. And, you know, one of the things that we were discussing, you know, before that I think is super interesting as it relates to the future of media, you know, all these new opportunities, all these new channels, all these new ways to talk to a consumer keep coming up. But for us, it's more about who we are as a brand, how we're speaking out. And then these are all just, you know, places that message can come to life, and the message can be adjusted. But overall, you know, we want our consumer to feel a connection and not to feel inspired, right? And inspiration is really big. And eventually be like, yeah, you know, I do remember that time I went on that early hike and that was super great. You know, I should do that again.
Yeah.
You know, and like to us, that's like the ultimate, is inspiring someone to get outside where maybe they hadn't been, or getting outside more than they had been. Because we, you know, and a lot of people that work for the brand, we feel really strongly that, you know, the more time you can spend outside, the happier you're going to be as a person.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, to drill that into that a little bit, you know, obviously, you know, it doesn't matter the platform, the message is ultimately the same. But I'm curious, do you look at, you know, different, how do you approach different social platforms, right? Because just as, you know, the audience gathers there for different reasons, right? The reason that you go on Instagram is different than why you might go on Snap versus, let's say, TikTok. How do you approach that? How do you, you know, how do you create a cohesive message, one across, you know, all of these channels that are, and particularly now, let's say one like TikTok, that's becoming increasingly, you know, important. And how do you show up there? The identity, the soul of the brand is still the same, but what do you highlight in different channels?
I think you'll find there's ways to bring stories like a have you ever to life in a lot of different ways. You know, that message is broad enough that you can create lots of different video content. It can be still content. It can be content related to product, you know, depending on what level of the funnel you're talking to, but also what channel, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, like a TikTok can be a quick video, right? And it could still have that have you ever message. And on an Instagram story, you can have kind of the same thing. And you can adjust it based on the audience that you think is there and the audience you want to connect with in those different channels. It's just a matter of testing and learning as well. You know, like just like any other brand, we have different ways that we bring content to life, and some works better than others. And you start to learn what works for your brand in the different channels. And that, I think, is super important. I think not being afraid to fail and not being afraid to try. You know, sometimes you can spend more time talking about whether or not you should be doing something than just going out and doing it and seeing how it goes. I think that's super important.
What are some of the learnings that you've had? I mean, you know, as you know, you tested and learned. I mean, you've had tremendous success, but I'm sure that, you know, in this journey to really understand how you come to life in each of these platforms, you probably had some learnings along the way, I imagine.
Yeah, I can give you a really great example. So TikTok's a great example. We are newer to TikTok. We launched, I believe, about a year and a half ago. And one of the things we learned is like, sometimes it takes a minute for people to just start to discover your TikTok content. And you can go from like very low engagement to an insane amount of engagement in a really fast period of time. But we also found, you know, people on TikTok really enjoy our snow content. You have an athlete do like a backflip, you know, that just skyrockets in engagement. But it's like these quick moments, right? Like, and so, you know, we think about that when we're creating our content. So it's, you know, not just about, you know, a big anthem, but it's also about, okay, here's our big anthem, but how does that come to life also in a very short form video that is compelling and interesting enough for someone on TikTok to be like, oh, that's super cool. I'm going to share it with some of my friends. And then those people share it and like it just skyrockets. And I think the power of that platform is just figuring out where you as a brand can resonate with the consumers you want to resonate with. And once you kind of figure that out and get that audience, it really, it skyrockets, which is pretty amazing to watch. And a lot of that is organic, which is also super amazing.
Tell me, you know, how much work do you do, since we're talking, you know, about social with, you know, content creators, and do you think that, you know, the relationship with content creators and influencers and, you know, super fans, you know, will change actually? Is this something that is going to be shifting as we move forward?
I think content creators is a different moniker that I would use than influencers. I think there's like a lot of power behind content creators. There's a lot of power about letting someone, especially for a brand like ours that can be as broad as we can be, to give them the creativity to do something interesting for us. And we have seen some success with content creators. We continue to explore the space. And I think it's an important part of a social strategy to see success. But I also think, especially for a brand like ourselves, we do have to be very careful on who those content creators are and making sure that they align with who we are as a brand. And so we do spend a lot of time with that, and a lot of time making sure we're giving the right parameters to someone to give us, you know, what we feel like is authentic content. Because you know, authenticity is a huge part of who we are. And it's something that we we like to continue to uphold as such an iconic brand. And that's something, it's a careful line that you have to play, because you also want them to be super creative.
Yeah.
And so, finding that right balance can take time. And again, there is that level of testing and learning as well. Not everyone's an immediate hit.
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, what about social commerce, right? This is something that has been really exploding, I would say, in the last, year and a half. And now on platforms like Instagram, but also now with TikTok implementing it. How important do you think that is actually, toward the way that you bring, go from brand to, to driving the purchase? How important is that, do you think?
I think from my own personal opinion, I think for a larger brand in our space, and I think also the consumer, they do purchase through the social cart. I've seen it, but I don't think the scale is quite there yet. And I do think that a consumer is not necessarily upset to go from seeing a product in an Instagram ad and then clicking through to a product page. I still think that the behavior is still perfectly acceptable. And I think that down the road it may change, but as of now, I don't feel like the scale is there yet, that people are as comfortable to just buy straight from an Instagram checkout on a regular basis at the scale that, the North Face would feel provides a ton of value. I do think it's an interesting space, and it's definitely worth exploring. But I also have seen social channels come and go, and I think being understandable of like taking advantage of these opportunities, but I also look at, is it worth devoting the resources to, or would the resources be better spent in improving what our mobile experience looks like when someone does click through to our site? I do think it's nice to drive someone to your own property and, allow them not only to see that space, the consumer behavior is definitely going more towards like even going onto our website, going straight to product pages or straight to product listing pages rather than, the homepage of a brand. And so I do think it's more and more important to think about the journey that a consumer is taking and how they're thinking about, what are other ways that you can help them to discover more about your brand when they land on a product page. And that I think is a super interesting space to explore. And we talk a lot about, how we can do that, especially around our bigger marketing campaigns.
Yeah, I wonder, along this, this journey, we talked about the ever-growing challenge of attention, right? The fact is that consumer attention, particularly as they interact with media, becomes, smaller and smaller, across audiences. So, tell me, how are you addressing this challenge? We had talked about how do you capture for both storytelling as well as driving to purchase. How do you capture the attention in a meaningful and engaging way?
I think powerful content is a huge part of that, and I think making sure that your message is connecting on an emotional level is a huge part of that. But the second piece of that is really thinking hard about that consumer journey. If they're where is a consumer flowing through your website? Where is a consumer flowing through your different marketing channels? And how are they seeing your marketing along the way? And I think it's more and more of these like snackable bites that line up to a larger message. And having those moments and finding ways and more finding ways to get a consumer to connect to your brand in a shorter message. And it's a huge challenge. But I do think it's super important. The consumer can drop so quickly and move on. If there's a small barrier, they're going somewhere else because someone else is going to do it faster. And so it is something we think a lot about. It's something that, when we are creating our thoughts around who we are as a brand, how we're evolving and how we're speaking to our consumer, we put a lot of rigor on ourselves to think about how can we do this in a way that they'll connect quickly and understand quickly, because you can lose them so fast. And we do a lot of learnings from that and a lot of testing with that to help understand that.
It's interesting, right? Because, it's becoming ever more challenging to have, a one-on-one or tailored conversations, if you will, with consumers now, with, the advent of privacy in the way that we haven't seen it really in quite some time. And along with that, of course, the disappearance of the cookie. I would love to, hear your thoughts, as we are entering this era. How are you addressing, this challenge? I would love to hear about, obviously, how are you collecting, first party data? I know you guys have a really amazing loyalty program, so the Explorer Pass. So I'd love to hear, how do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. Like everyone who is in marketing, we've been thinking about this a lot, as I think everyone knew it was coming. You'll notice we did actually relaunch our loyalty program. It was called VIP. We renamed it to the Explorer Pass and relaunched it. I would say we took a lot of learnings from VIP and did a lot of work to create more of that one-on-one conversation with our loyalty consumers, and a lot of ways to create really cool, interesting surprise and delight rewards, and a really good, strong reason to be a part of our loyalty program if you were wanted to be part of an iconic brand like the North Face. And it's paid off. I think recently we won an award from Newsweek as one of like the best loyalty programs, which is amazing. And nice. I would give a tip of my hat to the whole team that works super hard on our loyalty program. And I think it's super important to have that. At the same time, I think as a brand like ourselves, we do have such a broad consumer. It's also important to create marketing that that can resonate with multiple audiences at the same time. So you don't have to always be super worried about that first party data. But at the same time, you can't ignore it. And I think our loyalty program is a huge part of that. And we're really happy with how it's been running, and excited to see it grow and excited to see where it heads. And I think at the same time, I feel for a lot of newer brands, because it is going to be harder to kind of jumpstart your brand. Like a lot of brands jumpstarted through a Facebook of the world, and now it's going to be more difficult to do that. And so I think more than ever, you're going to see more companies trying to do something similar to us, and finding ways to connect with their consumer through, whatever that is, whatever type of loyalty or sign up program, which also means at the same time, like as a brand, you need to create a strong reason for someone to love you enough, or to take the time and effort to be like, I want to hear from this brand on a regular basis. Like that's a pretty good barrier to entry that a newer brand, I think it's going to be more difficult.
Walk us through how do you actually, convince, I don't know how many, subscribers, or I should say members or holders you have, but how do you manage to do that in terms of, content, beyond just the the reward points? How do you do that?
I mean, there's a lot of different ways that they've been looking at it. So there's definitely a lot of like early product looks that our Explore Pass members get, whether it's through one of our collabs or one of our iconic product drops that we have. They usually get kind of early access. There's also a lot of events that we used to do and are going to start doing again now that COVID is moving in a positive direction. But that's also a huge part of who we are. That's been difficult, right? Is we love to connect with our consumer through events. It's outdoors, it's who we are, it's in our heritage, in our DNA. And I think you're going to see more of that, and a lot more just ways that you get kind of peeks into who we are as a brand that no one else will. So it's exclusivity is a big part of it. And I think there's enough people who like that message resonates with them for sure.
I'm curious, during these talks, we have heard a lot about, the new frontier, right? So, here, I referred to, of course, the topic of, NFTs, and also having, building communities, within the metaverses, I should say, within virtual worlds. I'd love to hear, how you think about that, given that, your mission is to get folks outside. And this is, well, precisely, it seems at odds, of course, spending, time in a virtual world, but perhaps it's also the perfect place, right? To be, because that's where you're most needed. And this is where the reminder to people about getting out and living in the real world. Here, I think, of course, you had this Unplug campaign a number of years ago. I think 3 years ago, if memory serves me right, and it was all about get out in front of the leave the screen, go out. So how do you think about NFTs? How do you think about the metaverses? How do you and potentially showing up there?
So I can start with NFTs. I think I have 12 extra wrinkles from the last 2 months in thinking and discussing this. But with NFTs, I think there's actually a lot of interesting ways that they can be utilized outside of what I would say most people are seeing and hearing about NFTs. So there's this like artist collectibles NFTs, which has been the really popular way to utilize it. But some of the ways that we've been discussing it is, you could utilize it as a authenticator token that could get you into an event. It can give you access to a collab at one of our stores. It can be utilized in ways that could actually drive someone outside. You could almost say like, show up to X place and we have tokens placed in these different spots. And if you collect the tokens, you can get, a prize. There's different ways that I think,
like Pokemon a little bit, right?
Yeah, like Pokemon a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think there's ways to utilize them to align with our mission. And that is the thing that we spend a lot of time thinking about, even with the metaverse. Some of the things that you can do in the metaverse, you can't do in real life. You could, and so we're starting to explore what that can look like. And it is one of those things where we want to make sure we're doing it for a reason that aligns with our brand and who we are. And so it does probably take us a little more time to think through that and figure out the best way for us to take advantage of it or not take advantage of it. And I do think as a brand that has the heritage that we do and has, the years behind it that we do, we do have the luxury to be like, does this make sense or does this not make sense? And if it does, great. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. And so that's something that we're definitely spending a ton of time thinking about. I also, just on a personal note, I think the metaverse is kind of an interesting thing that has just exploded since Meta came out. But as you and I were discussing, I feel like the metaverse has been around for over a decade longer, but just in different forms. And a lot of people will say, something like a Second Life just came too early, was before its time. But everything about Second Life aligns with everything that I'm hearing about what the current metaverse is. There's a lot of conversation about what the metaverse will be in the next 3 to 5 years. And so it is something where I think every brand is trying to think about what does like the metaverse mean for us. And for us, it's like doing it in an authentic way that aligns with who we are, and introduce it, if we could use it as a way to introduce people to the outdoors and, give how-to videos, or give ways for people to then close their computer and go to the outdoors and inspire people, that could be really powerful, because people are there. And I think as long as a consumer is spending time there, we want to try to find the best way for us to explore being there and what that can look like.
Yeah, I can imagine, for example, making, some of the more, let's say, like inaccessible experiences or places to, most people, accessible. Here, I think of, let's say, whether that's climbing, Mount Everest, or, a journey to Antarctica, right? In a very immersive way, right? I mean, those are things that are just incredible. And the fact is that the majority of people, won't have that opportunity to do something. So it seems like it could be, it could be an interesting opportunity for you guys.
Yeah, and I mean, when you get into like 3D technology and AR technology, there's a lot that can happen there. A number of years ago, we actually did create 3D videos of some of our athletes doing mountaineering, on expedition mountaineering, and you could put on the Oculus, and you'd be in the boots of someone at the top of a peak, climbing and looking around. It was an amazing experience. I think the hard part is the scale just isn't there yet. And again, we were maybe a little ahead of our time. And it was like, you had these Oculuses sitting in stores, and it was intimidating. And I don't think people really experience it at the scale for it to catch on. But I do think as it becomes more adopted, I think there's a lot of opportunity there to bring the outdoors in, but also to inspire people to go outside.
How far do you think we are away from that tipping point?
I mean, if I knew that, I think it's a crystal ball. I still am not convinced either way. I think I'm still on the fence of, are consumers really, one, is the technology going to get cheap enough that enough consumers will purchase it? I still think more people are buying a Nintendo Switch than an Oculus. So I don't think we're quite there yet. Will we get there at some point? I'm still on the fence, because it is getting cheaper, but I'm not seeing like an enormous adoption rate. And so I on a personal basis, I'm very curious. I think it could go either way right now.
Interesting. Tell me, what else, do you think about, in the future, in terms of media? What are some of the other innovations that you're considering, beyond this, or, how, you need to think about in order to, continue to thrive in the next few years?
So I can tell you one of the things that we recently worked on that was kind of interesting is we partnered with our sister brand Vans, and actually created a pop-up shop in Vans World in Roblox. And they winterized Vans World. And then we have an actual shop where we're selling some North Face Roblox product. And then we also have some Vans North Face limited edition product that we're just selling during these certain windows. And there's a snowboard, there's a helmet, there's some goggles. And it's one of those, it made sense. And it was a really cool, interesting way for us to explore what we could be doing in the metaverse. And, I think we're always kind of looking further out as well, but right now it seems like everything is moving so quickly. I think even on the last panel, it was like the metaverse changes faster than daily at this point. So I think we're all kind of waiting to see where it starts to settle. I think there's a lot of, first like excitement to be the first to something. But I think we're all like, is NFTs here to stay? Is the metaverse here to stay? Like, are enough people gonna start going into Decentraland? And, is it gonna have this audience size that has the scale that we would want to see?
Gotcha. Fantastic. As we're drawing to a close, I wanted to read, a couple of the questions that the audience has for you. So this comes from Anonymous.
Okay.
Peter, would love to know, have you ever considered the sound of your brand? You have excellent visual brand recognition, but thoughts on creating the sound of your brand?
So we did actually, I believe it was 2 falls ago, we created a sound for TikTok. So at North Face, around our reset campaign. And we have thought about it. We do have Spotify playlists that we update on a semi-regular basis. And it is something that I think is another one we continue to explore. And honestly, it's part of our heritage. The Grateful Dead actually opened at the original store opening of the North Face. Like, music is a part of who we are in some ways. But it's something that I think is a continual exploration. I think it's super interesting and something we do think about.
Excellent. Another question comes from Robert Wells, and Robert asks, have you considered mobile gaming as a channel to reach consumers?
I would say mobile gaming is such an interesting one. We definitely think about gaming, and when it aligns with our brand, is it something that we want to be involved in? There's a lot of action sports games out there. I believe in the past we did partner with, there was a video game called Steep that came out, and we did have some North Face product in that game. And I think, when it comes to mobile gaming itself, and, I'm not quite sure the direction they're asking, whether it's advertising in mobile gaming, which we definitely do mobile advertising, but creating our own mobile game, that's a whole other bag of beans that we have not quite delved into. But also I think it's one of those, like, do we want someone playing a game on their phone, or do we want someone going outside? That's like always the vision that we have to put towards it of, does it make sense for our brand?
Yeah, fantastic. And we have Paul, which tells me we're about up with our time.
No, hey, Peter, great insights. I'm curious, have you considered dropping the North Face clothing line in the metaverse, so you can pimp out your avatar with the latest North Face clothing?
100%. I think there's definitely conversations in that direction of what that could look like. And yeah, I mean, just
that's
like
great. Congrats on your loyalty program. Way to knock it out of the park there.
Thank you.
And, are you looking at utility NFTs as part of your loyalty program, and then have the NFT associated with maybe some of your collectible clothing lines?
I mean, it's a super good question, and it's something that for sure we're exploring. And I would say every apparel brand is exploring the same thing. But like, the space is so new. And
I think Adidas and Nike, they dropped some collectible NFTs that have skyrocketed. Yeah, I think the utility value of NFTs is people are trying to understand what that might look like.
Yeah.
And then also, how do you use them in connection with the real-time apparel and the offline version of that?
Yeah, and I think the other thing to think about is it's 3D product in a virtual world. You could even explore like, what would the future of outdoor like outerwear product look like? You know, you could create in a virtual world product that you're like, hey, this is something we're thinking about 10 years from now. You know, like I think it could be really fascinating to start to look at, you know, what you can do in this space when you don't have margins or supply chain issues
Yes.
or
Yes.
inventory issues, you know, color issues. Like there's a lot you can do with it. And
yeah, we'll have to save that for another Metaverse Summit.
I could talk for hours. Anyways.
We could go deep on that. That'd be awesome. So thanks so much. Thanks,
Definitely.
Doug.